Philosophers talk to our times. Fracturing the prism. Brief notes on community and what it means to be somebody. For me, sounds very pompous, doesn't it? Over a lifetime of living in shared communities and trying to be caught up in art movements, I guess I've seen a lot. And although I really don't like doing my irritating uncle advice, I kind of feel it's useful sometimes. Because there are some things that are obvious if you've lived through it the hard way. And I'm going to do two today. I might get onto a third. The first is that issue of property. Always with the community, they're bound up with the double binds of capitalism. Those who feel that they've put in the money have a different attitude and a different position from those that don't. And your problem is, you can't do anything about that. You actually have to understand it and see it from each person's point of view. It takes a lot of mental discipline to keep it going. I once lived for a while in a community up high on a moor in the southwest of England, a hidden valley, where a gardener, she managed to produce tomatoes earlier than I can produce them, here in the deep south of France, and she was at 1,000 feet. I was at 1,000 feet here, but an awful lot further south. She was remarkable, and her partner was a good craftsman, and they lived with a woman and had lived with her for ages, and it felt like it was a really functioning community. But the laws of property kick in. Who actually owns what? You see, there you get caught up with the old, I guess it's lock, isn't it? Is it, I own it because I bought it, or own it because I've made it? Problem. It's a genuine problem, and not one that can easily be got rid of, and not one that can be mitigated by the landlord says to just treat me as one of the workers. Doesn't matter, just treat me. It's like a boss saying that. As Marx would say, doesn't stop it being an exploiter. There's nothing that stops a landlord being a landlord. You can't pretend you're not, nor does it make it any better if you do. When I was a very young man and first running a shared house, I bought the house and we were letting to all sorts of people. I used to play that game. Just treat me as one of the tenants. Well, two things happened. First of all, I didn't understand how that meant that people couldn't say fuck off to you when they needed to, when they wanted to, when they didn't like you. And so perfectly reasonable relationships that might have been okay if given more time, you could muscle into, totally unconsciously. I didn't know I was doing it. And so I lost friends that way, or people who could have perhaps been friends. More than that, I'm a scruffy bugger, and all sorts of people wouldn't live with me by choice. So if I'm really pretending to be one of the lads, I'm likely to get screamed at. So being attacked in my own kitchen for untidiness became a feature of my life for a while. Until I became a little less untidy, and the rules became a little clearer. These things are genuinely difficult. I've talked about it before. It's terribly easy to galump into it. To assume that you're so decent, it will all be okay. Or to assume that it will be all right, we'll be able to talk about it. It won't be all right, and you might not be able to talk about it. A lifetime trying to mitigate it makes me think that you have to always be open to understand it from the other person's point of view. And it really just does come down to that. You have to follow the lines of property. And, let's use an odd word, incarnate yourself if you were in their position. And that's just a work of sympathy. And it's sympathy, it's not empathy, it's sympathy. That is perpetual. It's a task. And linked to that, you probably have to understand a community. Probably have to understand all communities. If communities really are the answer. Not as something permanent, For most people, most of the time, most communities are things you join for a while, you're part of, and then you move on. There are people holding communities down, absolutely, but also only perhaps good for a while. And it is always a question of throughput. And that is the other thing that links to property. As you can see immediately, it creates a divide between those people who are free to go and those people who are not. It's a very strange divide, that one. I was once told by a tenant that I could move and he couldn't because he had a dog and it was easier for me to find a house than it was for him. It was my house. But that was a beautiful inversion of the rules. That actually moving on and being able to move on and having successful communities are ones where people feel they can leave. Where they feel that there has been enough in the community, that they've learnt enough, that leaving is possible. Communities you can't leave are a prison, or just another word for prison. Communities that you could leave but you don't want to is the answer. And communities that perhaps you do leave and come back to. They have to be open, and very open. And that again ties back to the property, because you have to get the property such that it works that way. Here, the communities are full of people who are friends, who've bought houses together. And then life moves on, a mother grows sick. And one of them wants to pull all their money out. Come what may. And the entire association is caught on the hop and has to shift and change what it dreamt it would be. So property and that ability to move is always something that has to be negotiated, thought through, worried about. Because if you don't, it will always catch you on the hop. Makes you suddenly make choices that will destroy the entire edifice. I've seen it happen so many times. And so much so that when people tell me they're going to do it, I sit there going, And sometimes I offer advice, but not often, because you usually get thrown things at. The next, and philosophically most interesting. Oh, well, the Marxism in property ownership is interesting. Is, of course, that deep, complicated issue of ego position. I've said before, for me, a successful community is all about thinking about where you are going to make your stands. To say you must have no ego is just crapulous advice. It's crapulous advice because actually then you become a wheedle. I've known people like that. They're the worst because they can never hold a position down. I'm sometimes very rude about the notion of identity. I am, if it is held up as a fixed prism, a crystal that we all must follow. No, Deleuze is certainly right. Identity are masks we don. They are people we are, in social contexts. They are ways we create for a moment, for a while, a little empirical self, making a little stand. And then we move on. The forces of chaos shift and erode that individuality, and we find another one. And another. And so over the course of a life, many sometimes over the course of a day, as you move from relation to relation, who and what you are shifts and changes constantly. The strange thing about communities is it's terribly easy to get yourself dying in a ditch to defend something you don't even believe in. If you start generating ego positions for the sake of it. If you start saying, I want this out of this community. The entire thing falls a cropper straight away. Simply because it becomes impossible. If you harbour all the feelings of fury and irritation that are just natural to life, to create a position for you to defend, all of that really won't work if you want to live in a community. You actually have to think about yourself, get over yourself constantly. Think about what it is you want to defend, where you want to be within it. Within the setup, and whether that works. I love communities. I love living with people because it endlessly challenges your identity. Let me give you an example. Currently, first time in a while actually, My partner and I, we are doing what we used to do a lot of in Britain. We're putting on a spectac for Halloween, okay? Now, we do scripted spectacs with audiences as part of this, caught up in the story, whether they want to or not. Okay, with relatively straightforward, some monster is returning Lovecraft type theme, but they're not at all Lovecraft. They're more devil comes riding out, I think. But here we'll do it about the forest returning, so crossed with the willows. As always, who writes it and how it is written. And we can swap who writes it. Often my partner, because she's not dyslexic, writes it. And then the game is always to remember Bully Bottom. And I often remember things like Bully Bottom. I mean Nick Bottom from Midsummer's Night's Dream. What makes that scene so incredibly wonderful? I mean the scene where poor old Quince, whatever he is, the weaver, is writing the story and Bully Bottom is offering advice and telling him people he could be and fantasizing about the parts he could have. What makes that so convincing is that Shakespeare has absolutely lived that. You can see it. Somebody has an actor has hung on his shoulder, who's probably as famous as him at that time, and said, "I want this part. Do this bit. I want to say this," because that is always what you do. And so, what do I do when my partner's writing down the script that I feel that I could have written? If I remember that I'm just Bully Bottom. So you pull back your ego position, and then when it's finished, I'll negotiate it with her. And then we'll give it to an order to a cast who are not cast at all, in the sense that they can have the right to rewrite bits of it because they have roles within it. And it's all democratic, but it's democratic with a structure. It's not everybody has a right to do everything, but it's once it is done, then you have a right to put it the way you want to do it. It's a slight shift in position. So you incarnate what you are from within the script, not without of it. And if somebody rubbishes the entire script, but they're not going to do that because we listen to people. They're just not going to do it. They're not going to do it because we listened to things that they said when we were writing the script down. So we will write them their parts. And it will work. We've done it before, and it will work. But it works by sheer flexibility. By sheer not saying this is all about me. I am an artiste. God's teeth. It's exactly what you never do if you're an artist. Because being an artist, like living in a community, is all about not thinking about who you are and about working out where you want to be today, what you want to fight about, what matters. Next, again, the community living. You have to be very good Spinoza. When, in tough days of running shared houses, I used to read and reread those parts of the Ethics in part 4 and part 5 where Spinoza gave advice about what a man of reason does, how he avoids being scored by contrary affects. And most important, I think, is Spinoza's advice on conflict. Spinoza doesn't like conflict much, but he's prepared to have it. And his advice is the straightforward advice, but is that you must not only pick your fights, you must pick when you do them, but also you must ensure that you know what you're fighting about. And for me, that's the most important advice Spinoza ever gave me, I think. It's terribly easy when you're caught up, you see, in negative emotions, when you're caught up in pain or loathing, when you're caught up in very dark places, to scream hatred. It's the natural human response. And then you hate a person, and you never hated the person anyway. You hated an event, something that they did, the way they click their teeth when they're eating, the way they farted without telling you. You hated the little. Sorry, you were annoyed by the little, but you hate the big. And before you do any conflict, it's always very, very necessary to have a good long look at yourself. And often when I'm wanting to say something that's actually quite aggressive, I'll start off even talking to the person I'm going to pick the fight with on the positive and not the negative. So you go through all the things you still agree with. And then you come across the conflict. And that's because that allows the conflict to transform itself. For a moment, just for a moment, you might see it from their point of view. And if you see it from their point of view, you can make a judgment about whether they're a hypocrite and whether you're right to be furious or whether you're an idiot, which is always perfectly possible. I never ever rule out the fact that it might just be me being a prat. It happens, often. But if you don't go directly into a conflict, but rather work out what you agree with first, then you're usually, as Spinoza would say, a much better position. A much better position to reach an accord, to actually resolve things. So it's always worth doing. But if you have got a conflict, then my own advice is always fight to win. And don't take prisoners, which I'm afraid is both true. Occasionally, once in a blue moon, when those doesn't work, I will fight to win, because you don't, and yeah. And that's the other thing about conflicts, is the conflict has to be brief. So if you're fighting to win, you ain't fighting a long conflict. Never, ever, if you're wanting to run a true community, have a conflict that can last, more than a couple of minutes. It ought to be a flash in the pan, and that is that. And if you can't fight like that, then don't fight at all. So this has been an odd one. It's been an odd one because living with other humans is a very complicated philosophical game. You could not call it philosophical, it's psychological if you like. But it's a very difficult thing. Living honestly with other human beings, I think, isn't psychological. I think it's a lot philosophical. Because you have to rethink and renegotiate what you are constantly. And you have to be prepared to do it. So, if your answer to the climate emergency is we must all bubble up in our own communities and work out how we're all going to live together, my advice to you is go off and read Spinoza and make sure you know what Marx says about property before you even think about living in a community. Because otherwise, the monsters will catch you before you know they're there.